All right. Well, let's look at apologetics and theology. Well,
Right. So in this section
yeah,
and the next several sections now, they look at uh, theology, philosophy, and these various kind of areas and how now you can integrate apologetics, how the integration approach works with regard to these various areas is
right,
what they're considering here.
right. And so the first one is apologetics and theology. To some extent, the differences among the four approaches to apologetics reflects differing theological roots. Generally, classical apologetics has been most dominant in Catholic theology and among apologists influenced by Catholicism, including Anglicans of a more Catholic bent, of course. This is what one would expect, given the formative contributions to the classical model by Thomas Aquinas. Of course, we got to talk about Thomas Aquinas. Thus, some of the leading classical apologists have been the Anglican writers of C.S. Lewis, who starts out Mere Christianity by almost begrudgingly being Anglican, and then also the Catholic philosopher Peter Kreeft and Norman Geisler. All those people we've talked about throughout the history of this book as well in the history of the classical era. And all those gentlemen who studied philosophy at Loyola University as well.
Right. So Geisler wasn't obviously a Catholic, but he did study at a Catholic university,
Right.
right? Go
Right.
figure. Right.
Right. And
Loyola.
that's one of his a critique against him, and a lot of his students surrounded themselves with Aquinas and Catholics and swam the Tiber River that way. Well, of course, classical apologists has been widely influential among Christians of most theological traditions and denominations. In fact,
Right.
one could probably say, other than maybe the last few years, it's been the dominant, or maybe even so much the only one kind of considered.
Right. So notice they're making the claim here that it didn't just stay with Catholics, right? It broadened out to other theological traditions and dominant and denominations as well.
So they're saying, just keep going. Just keep feeling the ripple effect.
All
Yeah.
right. So, yeah. All right. So, what about evidentialists? Well, they tell us that evidentialists tend to be evangelicals who are non Calvinist or Armenian in their theology. Remember, we're looking at apologetics and theology, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so classicalists tend to lean toward Catholic ideas, right? Not always. And we know that the classicalist approach is broadened more than just to the Catholicism. The evidentialists, they say, are evangelicals who are non-Calvinist or Armenian in their theology, right? And so they lean toward being Armenian. Again, they're looking at the general perspective, not each individual person who does apologetics in this kind of way. The Reformed apologists, as the name implies, tends to be staunchly, even perhaps dogmatically, they tell us, Reformed or Calvinist in their theology. And so while not all Calvinists, espouse Reformed apologetics, for instance, R.C. Sproul was a classical apologist.
Mr. Reformed himself.
Yeah, that's right. But most, if not all, Reformed apologists are Calvinists or have deep Calvinist theological roots, right? So there's kind of the perspective, theological perspective for that apologetic methodology. And then they tell us that we've traced the roots of, fideism to Martin Luther. And again, not all Lutherans are fideists, right? Montgomery is a Lutheran, and obviously he's the paradigm evidentialist, right? So not all Lutherans are fideists, but most, if not all, modern fideists have roots in the Lutheran theological tradition. So that's, so they've given us a perspective in terms of apologetics and theology.
Right. So it doesn't follow that once you've picked your camp that you're going to be in there. And so why is that? Because they're suggesting that different areas or avenues of theology or denominationalism has seen value in those other areas and brought them into consideration within their theological perspectives. Well, that brings us to the relationship between theology and apologetics. The classical apologist tends to view apologetics as prolegomena, establishing the foundations of theology. the evidentialists as polemics, defending debated aspects of theology, and Reformed apologists as part of theology, and the fetus as persuasive theology. So those are the four kind of avenues that those different types of apologists tend to take when it comes to apologetics and theology. And so the authors say then, we suggest that there is truth in all of these views. And of course, that seems to be the case of what they're unpacking here because of how they're identifying them.
Yeah, good.